The doorbell rang at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, interrupting the peaceful silence I had grown to cherish over the years. I was in my home office, reviewing the quarterly reports for my tech company, when the chime echoed through the marble-floored hallway of my sprawling estate. My German shepherd, Atlas, lifted his head from his favorite spot near the window, ears perked with curiosity. I wasn't expecting anyone. My assistant had the day off, and my business partner knew better than to drop by unannounced. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I saw them. 5 figures standing awkwardly on my front porch, their heads turning every which way as they took in the manicured gardens, the fountain sculpture I'd commissioned from an Italian artist, and the Tesla parked in the circular driveway. My breath caught in my throat. It had been 12 years since I'd seen any of them in person. My mother stood front and center, her hair grayer than I remembered but still pulled back in that same tight bun she'd always favored. Beside her was my father, shoulders slightly more hunched with age, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Behind them stood my brother Derek, my sister Michelle, and Michelle's husband, Craig, a man I'd met exactly twice before they stopped inviting me to anything at all. For a moment, I considered not answering. I could pretend I wasn't home, let them ring the bell until they gave up and left. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and after 12 years of silence, I needed to know what had brought them to my doorstep. I straightened my shirt, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. Atlas followed closely, his presence a comfort. When I opened the door, 5 pairs of eyes locked onto me, and I watched their expressions shift from nervous anticipation to barely concealed shock. "Marcus," my mother said, her voice softer than I remembered. "You look well." "I am well," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "This is unexpected." An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. My father cleared his throat. Derek shuffled his feet. Michelle clutched Craig's arm like she needed physical support. "Can we come in?" my mother finally asked. "We'd like to talk to you." Every instinct told me to say no, to close the door on them just as they'd closed the door on me more than a decade ago. But I'd worked hard to become someone who didn't let old wounds dictate his actions. I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. They filed past me into the foyer, and I watched their eyes widen as they took in the interior of my home. The chandelier hanging from the 2-story ceiling. The original paintings adorning the walls. The sweeping staircase with its wrought iron railing. The view through the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the infinity pool and the valley beyond. "This is quite a place," Derek muttered, the first words he'd spoken to me in 12 years. "Thank you," I said. "Living room is this way." I led them through the house, noting how they walked carefully, as if afraid to touch anything. When we reached the living room with its plush sectional sofas and modern fireplace, they settled onto the furniture with the kind of reverence usually reserved for museum exhibits. I remained standing, choosing a position near the window where I could see all of them clearly. Atlas sat beside me, his warm presence grounding me. "So," I said, breaking the silence that had settled over the room like a heavy blanket, "what brings you here after all this time?" My mother glanced at my father, who looked down at his hands. Michelle stared at the floor. It was Derek who spoke first. "We wanted to reconnect," he said, though the words sounded rehearsed. "Family is important. We've let too much time pass." I almost laughed. 12 years, I said. 12 years of weddings, birthdays, holidays, graduations. Not a single invitation. Not a single phone call. And now, suddenly, family is important. "We were hurt," my mother said, her voice taking on that wounded tone I remembered so well. "When you chose to move away, to pursue that risky business venture instead of staying here and working with your father like we'd planned." "Like you'd planned," I interrupted. "I never agreed to spend my life working at Dad's insurance firm. I wanted to build something of my own." "And we thought you'd fail," my father said quietly. It was the most honest thing I'd heard from any of them since they'd arrived. We thought you were making a terrible mistake, throwing away a secure future for some pipe dream about computer programming. Software development, I corrected. And yes, I know what you thought. You made that abundantly clear when I left. What I don't understand is why you're here now. Another exchange of glances. More uncomfortable shifting. Finally, Michelle spoke up. We saw the article, she admitted. The one in Forbes. About your company, about the acquisition deal. We didn't realize you'd been so successful. And there it was. The truth I'd already suspected the moment I'd seen them on my security feed. They hadn't come because they'd had a change of heart about family bonds. They hadn't come because they'd spent 12 years regretting their treatment of me. They'd come because they'd discovered I was wealthy. The article, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. So you're here because I made money. That's not fair, Marcus. My mother protested. We're here because we want to be part of your life again. We're proud of what you've accomplished. Are you? I asked. Were you proud when I was sleeping on a friend's couch while building my first app? Were you proud when I was working 80-hour weeks, eating ramen noodles, and debugging code until 3 in the morning? Were you proud when I sent you the invitation to my company's first major product launch and you didn't even respond? The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face flush. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Derek studied his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. We made mistakes, my mother finally said. Parents aren't perfect, Marcus. We did what we thought was best at the time. What you thought was best was to cut me out completely, I said, my voice harder than I intended. You didn't just decline invitations or keep your distance. You erased me. When Michelle got married, I wasn't even told about it until I saw the photos on social media. When Dad had his heart surgery 2 years ago, I found out from a mutual acquaintance. You didn't want me in your lives when I had nothing, but now that I have something, here you are. It wasn't like that, Michelle said, though her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it like? I challenged. Explain it to me. Make me understand how family bonds are so important now, but weren't important enough for 12 years. Craig, who had been silent this entire time, shifted uncomfortably. Maybe we should go, he suggested to Michelle. This was a bad idea. No, Derek said suddenly. He deserves the truth. He looked at me directly for the first time since entering my house. Mom and Dad were embarrassed. When you left to start your business, they told everyone you'd be back within a year, broke and begging for help. They built this whole narrative about how you'd learn your lesson and come home with your tail between your legs. But you didn't come back. And when people asked about you, they didn't know what to say. So it became easier to just not talk about you at all. To act like you'd made this choice to distance yourself from the family. Derek, my mother snapped. It's true, Derek continued, his voice gaining strength. I went along with it. We all did. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to reach out. What were we supposed to say? Sorry we've been terrible for years? Sorry we were wrong about everything. I processed this information, feeling a complex mix of vindication and sadness. Part of me had always suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed was different. And now? I asked. What's changed besides my bank account? My father finally looked up. I'm sick, Marcus. Stage 3 lung cancer. The treatment is expensive, and our insurance doesn't cover everything. We've had to take out a second mortgage on the house. There it was. The real reason for this visit. Not reconciliation, not regret, not a genuine desire to rebuild our relationship. They needed money. How much? I asked, my voice flat. Marcus, it's not. My mother started. How much? 300,000, my father said quietly. Between the experimental treatments and the medical bills, that's what we need. I walked to the window and stared out at the perfectly maintained grounds of my estate. Behind me, I could hear them breathing, waiting, hoping. 12 years of silence, and they expected me to hand over $300,000. Do you know what the hardest part was? I asked, still facing the window. It wasn't the long hours or the financial struggle or even the fear of failure. It was not having anyone to share my successes with. When I landed my first major client, I wanted to call you, Mom, and tell you about it. When my app hit #1 in the store, I wanted to celebrate with you, Dad. When I won the Entrepreneur of the Year award, I sat in that auditorium surrounded by hundreds of people and felt completely alone because none of you were there. I turned to face them. I built this life by myself. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment of triumph, and every moment of despair, I faced it alone because you decided I wasn't worth your time unless I lived my life according to your plan. We're sorry, Michelle said, tears streaming down her face. We're so sorry, Marcus. We were wrong. We were stupid and prideful and wrong. I believe you're sorry, I said. I believe you regret how things turned out. But I don't believe you'd be here if that Forbes article had never been published. I don't believe you'd be here if Dad wasn't sick and you didn't need money. That's not entirely fair, my mother argued, though her voice wavered. Yes, the article made us realize what we'd been missing. Yes, your father's illness forced us to confront our pride. But we do want you back in our lives. We want to know the man you've become. Do you? I asked. Or do you want to know the wealthy man I've become? Because the person I am, my values, my character, my accomplishments, none of that has changed. I've been the same person for 12 years. The only thing that's different is the size of my house and the balance in my bank account. I walked back to where they sat, still clustered together on my expensive furniture, and I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. I'm going to tell you something, I said. And I want you to really hear it. I forgive you. I forgive you for abandoning me, for doubting me, for choosing your pride over our relationship. I forgive you because holding on to anger has only ever hurt me, never you. But forgiveness doesn't mean I'm going to pretend the last 12 years didn't happen. I paused, making sure each of them was looking at me. I will pay for Dad's treatment. All of it. The experimental procedures, the medications, the follow-up care. Whatever he needs, I'll cover it. The relief that washed over their faces was palpable. My mother's hand flew to her chest. Michelle let out a sob. Derek closed his eyes. My father's shoulders sagged as if he'd been carrying a weight too heavy to bear. But, I continued, and they all froze, there are conditions. First, this doesn't buy your way back into my life. You don't get to show up at family dinners and pretend everything is fine. You don't get to introduce me to people as your successful son and bask in reflected glory. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be earned over time, with consistency and genuine effort. Not because I have money, but because you actually want to know me. I let that sink in before continuing. Second, I'm not a bank. This is not the beginning of a pattern where you come to me every time you need money. I'll help with Dad's medical bills because I don't want him to die and I don't want you to lose your home. But any future financial requests will be denied. I didn't become successful to fund other people's lives. My mother nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. Of course. We understand. Third, I said, my voice softer now, if we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship, it has to be honest. No more pretending. No more saving face. If you can't be honest with me about your feelings and motivations, then we can't move forward. We can do that, Derek said. I can do that. I should have been honest with you years ago. I looked at each of them in turn, seeing them perhaps more clearly than I ever had before. They were flawed, proud, and capable of causing deep hurt. But they were also human, scared, and facing a crisis that had stripped away their pretenses. "I'm going to arrange for Dad's treatment," I said. "I'll have my financial manager contact you next week to set everything up. But after that, the ball is in your court. If you want to rebuild our relationship, you need to show me through your actions, not just your words. Show me that I matter to you for reasons beyond my money." My father stood up slowly, and for a moment, I thought he might hug me. But he stopped a few feet away, his eyes wet with tears. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice breaking. "I know we don't deserve this. I know we've been terrible. But thank you." The others stood as well, gathering their things with movements that seemed uncertain, as if they weren't sure what happened next. "Can I say something?" Michelle asked as they prepared to leave. I nodded. "When I got married," she said, "the whole day felt wrong because you weren't there. I told myself it was fine, that we'd made our choice as a family and had to stick with it. But every time I looked at the empty seat that should have been yours, I felt this awful guilt. I've been carrying it for years. I know sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry. I'm so sorry." "I appreciate you saying that," I told her honestly. I walked them to the door, Atlas still by my side. At the threshold, my mother turned back. "You've become an incredible man," she said. "I can see that now. I'm ashamed it took seeing your material success for me to realize it, but I can see it. You're stronger and more successful than any of us, and you did it all on your own. I'm proud of you, Marcus. I should have said that a long time ago." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. They filed out onto the porch, and I watched them walk to their car, an older sedan that looked out of place in my circular driveway. They drove away slowly, and I stood in the doorway until their car disappeared down the long driveway. When I closed the door, I leaned against it for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. Atlas nudged my hand with his nose, and I scratched behind his ears absently. The house felt very quiet. I walked back to my office and sat in my leather chair, staring at the computer screen without really seeing it. The quarterly reports that had seemed so important an hour ago now felt trivial. My phone buzzed with a notification, but I ignored it. For 12 years, I'd imagined various scenarios of my family reaching out. In some fantasies, they apologized and we reconciled beautifully. In others, I turned them away coldly, finally getting the satisfaction of rejecting them as they'd rejected me. The reality had been neither of those things. It had been messy, complicated, painful, and unexpectedly cathartic. I thought about my father's cancer and felt a twist of anxiety in my chest despite everything. He hadn't been there for me, but he was still my father. I didn't want him to die, and I had the means to help him. That had made the decision easy, even if the emotions surrounding it were anything but. The question now was whether they would follow through. Would they actually try to rebuild a relationship, or would they get what they needed and disappear again? Part of me expected the latter. 12 years of behavior patterns weren't erased by one uncomfortable conversation. But another part of me, the part that had held on to hope even when it seemed foolish, wondered if this crisis might be the catalyst for real change. Maybe facing mortality had shifted something in my father. Maybe seeing the consequences of their choices had opened my siblings' eyes. Maybe my mother's pride had finally crumbled enough to let genuine connection through. Only time would tell. I opened my laptop and composed an email to my financial manager, outlining the situation and asking him to set up a payment structure for my father's medical care. I wanted it handled professionally, with clear boundaries. This wasn't about holding money over their heads, but it also wasn't about being naive. As I hit send, my phone rang. It was Derek. I stared at the screen for several rings before answering. "Marcus," he said, his voice uncertain. "I know you just saw us, but I needed to call. There's something I didn't say in front of everyone else." "I'm listening." "When you left 12 years ago, I was jealous," he admitted. You had this courage to go after what you wanted, and I didn't. I stayed at Dad's firm because it was safe, because I was afraid to take risks. And when you started succeeding, that jealousy turned into something uglier. It was easier to go along with Mom and Dad's narrative than to admit I admired what you were doing. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry I let jealousy make me a coward. I was quiet for a moment, surprised by his honesty. That must have been hard to say. It was. But you deserved to hear it. And Marcus, I know you said we have to earn our way back into your life, and that's fair. But I want you to know I'm going to try. Really try. Not because of your money, but because I've missed my brother. I've missed having someone who understood me, who knew me before I became this version of myself that I'm not even sure I like. Derek, I said slowly, I'd like that. I'd like to get to know my brother again too. The real one, not the version that was performing for our parents. Yeah, he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. Yeah, me too. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime? Just the two of us. I'd like that, I said, and realized I meant it. After we hung up, I sat in my office as the afternoon sunlight shifted across the room. Atlas had fallen asleep at my feet, his gentle snoring the only sound in the house. 3 weeks later, my father started his treatment at one of the best cancer centers in the country. My financial manager had handled everything discreetly and professionally. According to the updates I received, the prognosis was cautiously optimistic. Derek and I had coffee twice. The conversations were awkward at first, both of us carefully navigating around years of silence. But by the second meeting, we'd found our rhythm again, sharing stories and jokes like we used to when we were kids. He told me about his job, his divorce from 2 years ago that I'd known nothing about, his struggle to figure out what he really wanted from life. I told him about the early days of my company, the deals that almost fell through, the nights when I'd been sure I was going to lose everything. Michelle called once, emotional and apologetic, but I hadn't heard from her since. I didn't push. Everyone processed things at their own pace. My mother sent weekly text messages, nothing heavy, just small updates. Your father had a good day today. The hydrangeas you sent are beautiful. Thinking of you. I responded briefly but kindly. Baby steps. My father didn't reach out at all, but Derek told me he talked about me often. Apparently, he'd started telling people the truth, that his son had built a successful tech company, that he'd been wrong to doubt me, that he was proud. It wasn't directed at me, but it was something. 2 months after that strange Saturday afternoon, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The return address was my parents' house. Dear Marcus, I've started this letter a dozen times and never known quite what to say. How do you apologize for 12 years in a single letter? How do you explain decisions that seem inexplicable even to yourself? The truth is, I was a coward. I built my entire identity around being right, around being the patriarch who knew best. When you chose a different path, it felt like a rejection of everything I'd built, everything I'd tried to teach you. Instead of being happy for your courage, I felt diminished by it. Watching you succeed should have filled me with pride. Instead, it filled me with shame. Shame that I'd been so wrong, shame that I'd let pride matter more than my son, shame that I'd wasted 12 years we could have spent knowing each other. Getting sick has a way of clarifying things. Suddenly, all the pride and stubbornness that seemed so important feels utterly meaningless. What matters is the people you love and whether they know you love them. I love you, Marcus. I'm proud of you. Not because of your money or your success, though those things are impressive. I'm proud of you because you had the strength to be yourself even when we made that difficult. You had the integrity to help us even when we didn't deserve it. You became a good man despite our failures as parents, not because of them. I don't know if I'll beat this cancer. The doctors are optimistic, but I'm a realist. If this is the end, I want you to know that my biggest regret isn't any business deal or missed opportunity. It's losing 12 years with my son. It's not being there to see the man you became. If I do beat this, I want to do better. I want to be the father you deserved. I know that will take time, and I know you have every right to keep us at arm's length. But I hope you'll give an old fool a chance to make things right. With love and regret, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table as morning light streamed through the windows. Atlas sat beside me, and I absently petted his head as I processed my father's words. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase 12 years of hurt, but it was honest and raw in a way my father had never been before. It was a beginning. I pulled out my phone and sent a text. Received your letter. Would you like to have dinner sometime? Just the 2 of us. The response came within minutes. I would like that very much. We met the following Saturday at a small Italian restaurant, neutral territory where neither of us had home field advantage. My father looked thinner than he had 2 months ago, the effects of treatment evident in his drawn features and slower movements. But his eyes were clearer, more present somehow. We talked for 3 hours. Really talked, not the surface-level exchanges we'd had during my childhood. He told me about his own father, who had been even more rigid and demanding. He talked about the fear of failure that had driven so many of his decisions. He admitted that he'd projected his own regrets onto me, trying to save me from risks he'd been too afraid to take himself. I told him about the loneliness of those early years, the nights when I'd stared at my phone, willing it to ring with someone, anyone from my family checking in. I told him about the day I'd signed the acquisition deal, how I'd sat in the lawyer's office afterward and felt hollow because I had no one to celebrate with. I told him how I'd almost called him 100 times but always talked myself out of it, afraid of more rejection. I'm sorry, he said again, and this time, sitting across from him in that small restaurant, I felt something shift in my chest. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I know, I said. I know you are. Can we start over? He asked. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but moving forward from here? I thought about it for a moment, looking at this man who had caused me so much pain but who was also just a flawed human being trying to make amends. Yes, I said. We can try. His relief was palpable. Thank you. Thank you for being bigger than I ever was. Over the following months, the relationship slowly rebuilt. It wasn't smooth or perfect. There were setbacks and hurt feelings and moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But there was also progress. Derek became a regular presence in my life. We started a tradition of Sunday hikes with Atlas, where we'd talk about everything and nothing. He eventually quit my father's firm and went back to school to study environmental science, something he'd always been passionate about. Better late than never, he joked, though I could see the genuine excitement in his eyes. Michelle and I had lunch once a month. She was cautious, almost skittish at first, but gradually relaxed. She told me about her struggles with anxiety, how the guilt about our broken family had weighed on her for years. We'd never be as close as we'd been as kids, but we were building something new. My mother and I spoke on the phone weekly. She'd started therapy, which surprised me, and was working through her own issues around control and approval. Our conversations were tentative but growing warmer with time. And my father fought his cancer with a determination that impressed his doctors. The experimental treatment worked better than anyone had hoped, and within 6 months, he was in remission. We had dinner together regularly, and slowly, carefully, we built a relationship based on honesty rather than expectation. 1 year after that Saturday afternoon when they'd appeared on my doorstep, I hosted Thanksgiving at my house. The entire family came, including some extended relatives I hadn't seen in years. As I watched them interact in my home, laughing and talking and being genuinely present with each other, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me would always carry the hurt of those 12 years. That pain had shaped me, taught me resilience, shown me what I was capable of achieving on my own. I wouldn't wish it away even if I could, because it had made me who I was. But another part of me was glad for this second chance. Glad that my father was alive and in remission. Glad that Derek had found the courage to pursue his passion. Glad that Michelle was getting help for her anxiety. Glad that my mother was learning to let go of control. As I stood at the window of my living room, watching my family gathered around my dining table, my father caught my eye and raised his glass in a silent toast. I raised mine back, and in that moment, I understood something important. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or pretending the past didn't matter. It wasn't about letting people off the hook or being a doormat. Forgiveness was about choosing not to let past pain dictate your present and future. It was about being strong enough to give people a chance to do better, while also being wise enough to protect yourself if they didn't. My family had hurt me deeply, and that would always be part of our story. But it didn't have to be the end of our story. They'd shown up at my luxury house 12 years too late, for all the wrong reasons. But somehow, imperfectly and messily, we were finding our way back to each other. Not because of the house or the money or any external measure of success, but because we'd finally chosen to be honest with each other and ourselves. And that, I realized, was worth more than any amount of money in the world. Atlas nudged my hand, and I smiled down at him. "Come on, boy," I said. "Let's go join the family." As I walked toward the dining room, I heard my